Join Andre Knott tomorrow night for a special Wednesday night edition of The Red Zone to kick off your Thanksgiving football festival and talk about the upcoming games this weekend. Get inside The Red Zone tomorrow night at 8 o'clock right here on Sportstime Ohio or stream it on Fox Sports Go. Welcome back into Drennan Live here on Sportstime Ohio, and that time again, fantasy football, getting exciting. So we join Ryan Fowler now at Fox Sports Fowler of foxsports.com/fantasy for all of your fantasy football needs and go-to guy. And tomorrow I will get to be in Berea covering the Browns, so we have you on a special day today here on a Tuesday. So thanks for joining us, Ryan.
You got it.
We have a lot to get to. We have a lot of fan questions for you. And, it's getting down to the wire now in fantasy football. Things are getting interesting, and a lot of competitiveness going on. I have a lot of questions for you, too, so you'll get some of those as well. But let's start off before we get to those with, kind of just a recap of Week 11 and some key injuries and things that went on that are going to affect lineups this coming week.
Sure. It begins and ends with A.J. Green, right? We have about 2-3 more weeks before we really get into the fantasy football playoffs, and losing A.J. Green. There is no A.J. Green on the waiver wire, unfortunately, but that doesn't mean you can't go there, check out the waiver wire, and at least hedge some of those points lost. And I think it begins and ends with Pierre Garçon. Pierre Garçon had a nice early part of his career and then goes to Washington and has a good game here or there. But you look at Pierre Garçon's game logs, and he's scored 10-plus fantasy points in 7 out of 10 games, and he's averaging better than 16 fantasy points per game over the last 3 weeks. And a lot's been made of Jamison Crowder there in Washington really making a name for himself. It just goes to show you that Kirk Cousins is doing a lot of things right, and we saw that against the Packers secondary over the weekend. So take a look at Pierre Garçon. I think another name that's still out there in a lot of leagues, Rashard Matthews in Tennessee. I've mentioned him a few times on the site. So Rashard Matthews, consistent play. Tajay Sharp of the Tennessee Titans also putting together back-to-back solid weeks. Devontae Parker down there in Miami with the Dolphins. Jarvis Landry, he's been muted a little bit because Devontae Parker has played so well. So there's a couple guys out there on the waiver wire that I think can at least hedge some of those losses now that A.J. Green's out at least 2-3 weeks.
All right, so looking ahead now, besides the guys that you just mentioned, maybe any sleeper picks or guys that might be on your bench that you should go forward and play this week?
Yeah, a lot of owners also lost Zach Miller. The Bears are a complete mess because it sounds like Jay Cutler's going to be out the rest of the year, too, with a shoulder injury. You lose Zach Miller, a tight end that was producing at a consistent clip and had a soft postseason schedule. So take a look at C.J. Fedorowicz. Had a nice game on Monday night for the Houston Texans, a career-high 10 targets. Brock Osweiler isn't going to redefine fantasy football production at the quarterback position. He does not throw downfield a ton, and that has actually hurt DeAndre Hopkins a lot this year. I know Will Fuller had a nice week 1 and 2, but it's been quiet since. So he's going over the middle, and Will Fuller and DeAndre Hopkins, they're taking some of those DBs off of the middle of the field, and Fedorowicz is eating pretty well. So if you need a tight end for Week 12 and beyond, take a look at Fedorowicz. It's a little chewed up right now. Tight end is a tough position to fill once you lose your main guy. And if you're in a deeper league, in a standard scoring league where you don't worry about points per receptions, Vance McDonald, him and Colin Kaepernick, they just work. And again, Kaepernick's not throwing a ton. They're doing a lot with Carlos Hyde. Kaepernick's running it with him, calling his own number. But Vance McDonald has a nose for the end zone, so I would take a look at him too.
Okay, and the other side of this now, any key players maybe to avoid this week as we look at the matchups that are in front?
That doesn't really jump out at me. I think right now there is some guys that are really struggling. DeAndre Hopkins, again, comes to mind. Houston just isn't going his direction, and he does take up a lot of attention. But it's just one of those things where Brock Osweiler just isn't evolving as a quarterback to get DeAndre Hopkins involved. I know a lot of people are frustrated with his play because, again, DeAndre Hopkins was a first-round pick. It's one of those guys that a lot of people were counting on. And then I guess another situation to keep in mind, Andrew Luck dealing with that concussion protocol. So, I'd be fading a lot of those Colts players this week only because, again, Scott Tolzien, we don't know what we don't know. So I would be a little anxious to start that up. The Pittsburgh defense, not so great, maybe last week as an exception. But yeah, they can get chewed up a little bit. So if Scott Tolzien kind of wants to stick around this league, we'll see what he can do. But I would assume on the short week, because they are playing on Thanksgiving, that they go conservative and you see Frank Gore and you see Turbin. That would be the direction I wouldn't be shocked to see putting a backup quarterback on the short week on a big game in Thanksgiving.
Talking with Ryan Fowler of foxsports.com/fantasy. You can get all your fantasy football information, ask him questions, follow him at Fox Sports Fowler. And we have some questions from Facebook and Twitter for you. And the most important one of the day, starting off here for you, Jim Tellup. Here we go. Can the fantasy Browns beat the fantasy Giants?
The Browns?
I had to start it off good.
It's a loaded question, and I don't think we have 20 minutes to digest all that goes into that. Maybe if we could go back in time and start up Jim Brown, there might be a chance, but the 2016 version, I think we know the answer to that. Eli Manning's actually playing a lot better as of late. Rashad Jennings in the backfield has played well as of late. I know this was a question in jest, but I really just don't want to tackle any of the Browns issues because, again, Kessler goes into concussion protocol second time this year. Josh McCown got crushed on that one scramble. It could get ugly in New York.
Okay, this is the last one on the Browns, just because I'm wondering now that we talked about this with McCown coming in, Barnidge, is he at all on that radar because he has the better chemistry we know with Josh McCown?
Yeah, Gary Barnidge has been out of sight, out of mind most of this season, but you're absolutely right. I mean, Barnidge has to be considered. I mentioned Zach Miller going down due to injury. Barnidge kind of falls in that 10 to 13 range if you're ranking tight ends. But yeah, I think, again, because McCown is there, I feel a lot more confident looking that direction as a stream option, or if you're dealing with an injury, Barnidge is kind of back in the conversation, which is a good thing because I know a lot of people invested high round draft picks in him.
Okay, now we can stay away from the Browns. Everything else going forward has nothing to do with the Browns. So here we go. Brian Wagner has the first question, not about the Browns, and says Allen Robinson or Jordan Matthews this week.
You know what? Give me Jordan Matthews. I think Green Bay is reeling, and that secondary is really bad. And I think Carson Wentz, home game, primetime game, I think Jordan Matthews could be in for a big one. It's nothing against Allen Robinson. It's just the consistency there with Allen Robinson. Jaguars play the Bills in Buffalo in November. That's not fun. I think that's going to be a tough game for Bortles to really put up a lot of points. I like Jordan Matthews against the Green Bay secondary. It's the way to go.
Okay, Jason has a question on should he keep or get rid of Jarvis Landry. I know you mentioned Devontae Parker down there, so is Landry a guy to keep around?
Well, in PPR leagues, I still think you have to keep him. Do you have to start him? No. And again, it also depends if you get rid of him, who are you picking up to replace him? Would I drop Jarvis Landry for Pierre Garçon? I mean, it's late in the season, and if you're not in a keeper league, I would strongly consider it because the consistency has been there from Garçon. It's not been there from Jarvis Landry. We actually produced a video for foxsports.com earlier today. Jarvis Landry hasn't seen 10-plus targets since week 4. I mean, this is Jarvis Landry, who is a volume receiver that PPR owners may not rely on to fall in the end zone, but they need a ton of volume, a ton of receptions, and maybe 80 to 90 yards. It's just not there. So I would definitely find different options than Jarvis Landry.
All right, Angelo wants to know if you are worried about Mark Ingram.
Yeah, I mean, we don't know at the time that we tape this if he's going to get out of concussion protocol in time to start. But here's the thing, Tim Hightower, he's been bouncing on and off the waiver wire, but it's so funny, even with Ingram there and active and playing over the last month, Tim Hightower is still average better than 14 fantasy points per game. And he had a career high or a career best 8 receptions in week 11 in a tough matchup. So I think Tim Hightower is one of those guys that even if Mark Ingram plays, Tim Hightower carved out a role in that flex position. So if you're looking for some depth there, I think Tim Hightower is a guy that I would look at. And Tim Hightower might be one of the best stories in football. He was out of football for 3 years, and the last 2 years there with the Saints has been able to produce at a consistent clip, albeit in a passing offense. So there you have it.
James Carrero says he has Gio Bernard in a couple of leagues. So is Burkhead from the Bengals worth picking up as a Geo-type replacement?
No is the short answer. Looking back at it, again, we've only seen so much of Rex, and I think his career high is 3 receptions for like 35 yards. in 3 years with the Bengals. So I would go to the waiver wire. Bilal Powell, pass catching running back for the Jets, is an option. I know he's been picked up in recent weeks. And then Wendell Smallwood could have a bigger role for the Eagles this week. But outside of that, I mean, that waiver wire, it is very picked over at running back. You're going to be digging deep. And I mentioned Robert Turbin earlier for the Colts. He scored, I mean, again, it's going to be a young quarterback in there. So it's picked over. I just don't think Rex Burkhead is the answer you're looking for with Gio out.
All right, Michael Thomas up next said, should I start Darren Sproles or find another running back?
Yeah, Darren Sproles with a rib injury, cracked rib, still sounds like he'll be able to play. But again, I really think that this Eagles-Packers matchup is one where Carson Wentz is going to want to throw a lot more. And I don't know if they're going to force Sproles out there. Plus, you really don't know. Even if he's active, you don't know about how many touches per game he's going to be able to get with that. And if he has any type of setback in the game, there's just a lot of risk in dealing with Darren Sproles regardless. And now he's got an injury, so that adds a different wrinkle to it. If they want to put Smallwood out there, give him 15 touches, I think that's the safer bet than Darren Sproles trying to play with the rib injury and again, not living up to expectations of what you need from him. So again, maybe the waiver wire, Bilal Powell would be a great replacement for Darren Sproles, similar type players in production. And then outside of that, I think Wendell Smallwood will probably be the most added waiver wire claim this week.
Everybody already picked up Powell because you told us to, I think, last week, right? So it was,
yeah.
I think everyone now looked ahead and, oh, he's gone now. So
yeah, well, and it just goes to show you that the running back position with all the injuries that we had dating back to week 2, it just goes to show by the week 12, I mean, running backs are at a premium and kind of everybody has their role. I mean, you could go up to Seattle and with CJ Prosise out with the shoulder injury, I mean, you could go Alex Collins, but Alex Collins, I mean, that's kind of where we're at right now.
All right, we have a couple Twitter questions, and at @DWardJr_86 is going to give you 3 options on running backs. He needs 2, please. Booker, Jordan Howard, Spencer Ware.
Spencer Ware, definitely. I think the matchup for Spencer Ware against Denver is too delicious to pass up. Spencer Ware has not played well over the last 2 to 3 weeks, but Denver, their rush defense, you can move the ball against them. And again, Alex Smith isn't winning a ton of games with his arm. And again, the Broncos secondary is pretty good. And then it's kind of interesting, you know, with Devontae Booker, Jordan Howard could have a huge role the rest of the way if Jay Cutler's out, and it sounds like he's out for the year. So there could be a lot of to see a lot of the running game of the Bears the rest of the way, and that's a good thing for Howard. I know Jeremy Langford kind of gets involved there in the passing game, but let's take a look at Howard this week because again, with no Cutler, I think Barkley's going to be turning around and handing it off to the guys in the backfield.
Another Twitter question at KD1012. Can I trust Brandon Marshall this week, or should I look elsewhere?
Trust is a funny word in fantasy football and in fantasy sports and in life. But no, I mean, trust with Brandon Marshall is tricky because the targets are down. I will say this. It's easier to trust him heading into this week against New England with Ryan Fitzpatrick named the starter again. They've bounced back and forth between him and Bryce Petty in recent weeks. But again, Fitz and Marshall did a lot of great things for the Jets in the passing game last year. I just think Brandon Marshall's been muted somewhat this year because Eric Decker has been out and placed on IR, and Marshall and Decker kind of fed off each other because they both drew so much attention in 2015. I think it's a good spot to use Marshall as a wide receiver 2, maybe low end, because the New England Patriots, they will give up some yardage through the air, and it just doesn't find the end zone that often.
Okay, I'm sorry, I did lie. I have to bring up the Browns one more time, but they asked it, not me, okay? So Anthony says Giants defense at Cleveland or Dolphins defense at home against the 49ers?
And this isn't anything against the Browns in this answer. I really think the Giants defense has played well, so they might start against a lot of teams, and it just so happens they're facing the Browns offensive line, so there's going to be a lot of opportunities to get some sacks picked up in that game and possibly force some turnovers. I'll take the Giants.
I knew that was going to happen right there. Aaron?
Well, here's the thing. I'll elaborate a little bit. The Miami Dolphins, our defense has the 49ers. And you know what? Colin Kaepernick has played well as of late. They put up 17 points against the Patriots last week. Kaepernick's averaging about 24, 25 fantasy points per game. So the Dolphins, even though it's a home game for them and San Francisco has to travel cross country, I just think that the 49ers offense isn't as bad as everybody thinks it is.
All right, Aaron would like to know, would you still play the Colts wideouts this week now with the whole Andrew Luck thing?
Yeah, it's going to be tough. I know the Steelers' pass defense, you can kind of pick that apart, but again, it goes back to we don't know what we don't know. And I think with it being week 12, to put T.Y. Hilton out there, to put Dante Moncrief out there, I feel a lot more confident in Frank Gore touching the ball 20-plus times than I do T.Y. Hilton breaking one free. Short week, not a lot of time to plan, and now you have a different quarterback there. There's timing. There's a lot of chemistry, a lot of intangibles that go into being ready to play a team like the Steelers, who are still hungry for wins and trying to compete in that division. So I would probably fade and avoid those wide receivers for the Colts.
All right, a few more. Brian Smith, is Thomas Rawls a must start now that he's the last man standing in Seattle?
Yeah, I mean, I think, again, you're going to see 15 to 20 touches for him in the coming weeks, and then that could be expanded as we get closer to the end of the season, only because they're easing Rawls back into this. And Russell Wilson is doing a nice job moving the chains with his arm. Jimmy Graham's played better. Doug Baldwin's been on complete fire. And Doug Baldwin did this last year around this time where him and Russell Wilson just put up a ton of points. So Rawls is a lock to start for fantasy owners that have him. You held on to him this long or you picked him up off the waiver wire, he's going to start for you. With no CJ Prosise, it helps out Thomas Rawls owners more than they probably know.
All right, James P. says, if Gronk sits again this week, are you starting Martellus Bennett after his performance last week?
Yeah, I mean, here's the one thing I always talk about with the Patriots. Bill Belichick doesn't care about your fantasy football team. So when you say Martellus Bennett's bad fantasy performance, yeah, it was bad. But I don't know if you remember back in September, early October, he had 3 touchdowns in a game. So the ebbs and flows of how Martellus Bennett is used week to week is going to vary because Belichick is a game planner. And I think right now, Martellus Bennett heading into week 12 is going to be a top 12 tight end in our rankings, and he's going to be worthy of the start. It comes down to Belichick and game planning, but we've seen Bennett do it before. It just hasn't happened in a long time because Gronk's been active. And again, we joked about it on Twitter, actually. I mean, Danny Amendola, he had 2 catches.
Right.
One of them happened to be in the end zone, and I think he had 5 yards total. So Belichick's going to find different ways to get everybody involved, and that includes Martellus Bennett. So I think he's a smart play. He's just not a lock for the type of performance that Gronk will give you.
And I was just going to say, and I was going to mention Amendola and guys like that because they have such different game plans. You never know where the ball is going to go. You have no idea. You know, obviously a Gronk, of course, if he's there, that's what's happening. But it seems like with the Patriots, those other receivers and those guys, can you play them? Can I play Amendola again this week, let's say, if you have a guy like that or a Hogan?
Well, until Malcolm Mitchell goes off and scores a touchdown, which he did. Again, they're moving so many chess pieces, and now with Dion Lewis back, it just adds another wrinkle. I mean, here's the thing. Everybody was so excited for Dion Lewis to come back for the Patriots, and who scored the first receiving touchdown? It was James White. James White, who's been lingering there the entire course of the season, really hasn't done much. He scores when Dion Lewis is active. That's what drives fantasy owners crazy.
Yes, fantasy football drives me crazy too. But thankfully, we have you to help us out and all the great advice. Ryan Fowler at Fox Sports Fowler of FoxSports.com. Let everybody know where they can go and what they can get from FoxSports.com.
Sure. You can check me out on Twitter at Fox Sports Fowler. I'll be hosting a Thanksgiving Day chat, 11 a.m. at FoxSports.com/fantasy.
Oh, here we go. Not more advice. I love it because I'm going to be wondering. I change my lineup like every other day. So thank you so much. Enjoy your Thanksgiving, and we will talk to you soon. Thanks, Ryan.
All right, take care.
And make sure you keep it right here on Sports Time Ohio. We'll be right back with Drennan Live to wrap things up.